all my stuff canceled last night, so I slept. The Subcommittee on Water, Wildlife, and Fisheries will come to order. Good morning, everyone. I want to welcome members, witnesses, and our guests in the audience to today's hearing. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recess of the subcommittee at any time. Under Committee Rule 4F, any oral opening statements at hearings are limited to the chair and the ranking member. I therefore ask unanimous consent that all other members' opening statements be made part of the hearing record if they are submitted in accordance with Committee Rule 3.0. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that the Congressman from Texas, Mr. Arrington, and the Congressman from Colorado, Mr. Hurd, be allowed to participate in today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. We are here today to consider 4 legislative measures. H.R. 839, to prohibit the implementation of a land protection plan for Muleshoe National Wildlife Refuge, sponsored by Representative Arrington of Texas. H.R. 1809, the Great Lakes Fishery Research Reauthorization Act, sponsored by Representative Quigley of Illinois. The Cormorant Relief Act of 2025, sponsored by Representative Ezell of Mississippi. And H.R. 2316, the Wetlands Conservation and Access Improvement Act, sponsored by Representative Hurd of the state of Colorado. I now recognize myself for a 5-minute opening statement. Today, the Subcommittee on Water, Wildlife, and Fisheries will examine 4 bills that will foster good stewardship of taxpayer dollars, achieve better and more effective conservation outcomes, and provide necessary relief from predatory double-crested cormorants for aquacultural producers. Our first bill, sponsored by Congressman Arrington of Texas, would prevent the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service from implementing the Biden administration's land management plan for the Muleshoe National Wildlife Refuge in West Texas and eastern New Mexico. Under the auspices of the Biden administration's misguided 30 by 30 land grab initiative, the plan authorizes the service to acquire up to 700,000 acres. This is more than a 100-fold increase in the size of the refuge that is currently 6,440 acres. If fully implemented, this one refuge would be larger than the entire landmass of the state of Rhode Island. Importantly, the refuge system in this country currently has over $2.6 billion in maintenance backlog needs. Yet, as is typical for Washington, D.C., rather than dedicating resources to address such maintenance needs, we had an administration that sought to make it exponentially worse by grabbing even more land under the federal umbrella. Common sense says that until this backlog is resolved, the service should not increase its footprint by increasing the amount of land that it manages. The second bill under consideration is the Cormorant Relief Act offered by Congressman Ezell of Mississippi, which would require the service to reinstate the aquaculture depredation order for double-crested cormorants. This order was in place from 1998 until 2016, when it was vacated by a judge in response to yet another lawsuit. Double-crested cormorants are a water bird that are most common in the Great Lakes states and the Southeast. They are opportunistic and intelligent predators, and to the surprise of absolutely no one, they often feed at aquaculture facilities where fish are easy to catch. A free lunch, so to speak. Through a variety of studies, it has been determined that predation from double-crested cormorants costs the aquaculture industry nearly $65 million annually in economic losses. The bill would streamline the permitting process to take double-crested cormorants while putting in place certain safeguards and accountability measures to ensure the species population health. The third bill we are considering is the Wetland Conservation and Access Improvement Act of 2025, offered by Congressman Hurd of the state of Colorado. The bill would extend the requirement in the Pittman-Robertson Wildlife Restoration Act, transferring the interest payments from unallocated Pittman-Robertson funds to the North American Wetlands Conservation Act, or NACA. NACA is one of the most successful conservation programs administered by the federal government. Nearly 34 million acres of wetland habitat across North America for migratory waterfowl have benefited from NACA projects. It is important to note that transferring the accrued interest does not take any money away from the Treasury. Under Pittman-Robertson, these monies would have instead been allocated to states. The state fish and wildlife agencies, through the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, however, are on record supporting this approach, further confirming its viability and effectiveness. Our fourth bill is the Great Lakes Fishery Research Reauthorization Act, sponsored by Congressman Quigley from Illinois. This bill would reauthorize the Great Lakes Fishery Research Program, which is administered by the U.S. Geological Survey, or USGS. This program works in concert with the Great Lakes Fishery Commission to conduct research to support the binational fisheries within the Great Lakes Basin. I will note that once again, the minority has chosen to ignore their own members' legislation, choosing instead to identify a witness to oppose a Republican bill rather than a witness to testify as to the value of the Democrat bill before us. This trend is not surprising. Less than half of the legislative hearings last Congress had a witness expressing support for a minority-sponsored bill. With that, I want to take the time to thank the witnesses for being here today, and I look forward to a robust conversation. I now recognize Ranking Member Hoyle for her opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses that came here today. Today's agenda includes 4 bills that address conservation efforts, wildlife management, and environmental research. Some take important steps forward, while others undermine science-based conservation and decision-making. I also want to note that the Department of Interior chose not to participate in today's hearing. This limits our ability to fully understand and assess the impact of these bills, which also hurts our ability to make the best possible decisions. H.R. 2293 restores a policy allowing unlimited removal of double-crested cormorants. This policy was previously overturned by a court. Americans deserve sensible tools that help them manage predators like the double-crested cormorant that threaten their livelihoods. These birds can cause problems for aquaculture producers, so producers need to have lethal and non-lethal options for managing them. However, I'm not sure what problem we're solving for here, especially when we don't see evidence to say that the current permit system isn't working. I'll note again, it's hard to talk about this issue without hearing from the Fish and Wildlife Service, which would be responsible for implementing this bill. I hope my colleagues will work with us to understand the agency's perspective on whether there's a problem here and allow a discussion based on these facts, and if so, what an appropriate solution might be. Next is H.R. 839, which blocks the gradual expansion of Muleshoe National Wildlife Refuge in Texas. The Muleshoe National Wildlife Refuge had a public process to determine a new boundary area where the Fish and Wildlife Service can purchase land from willing sellers. My concern is this bill blocks landowners in that area from selling land or applying for conservation easements. It seems like government overreach to limit the ability of a private property owner to sell their private property just because it's for conservation purposes. I live across the street from land that was sold to the Mackenzie River Land Trust to keep in conservation. The Siletz tribe purchased 500 acres down the road from me to keep it in conservation and grow indigenous plants. A willing buyer and a willing seller came to a deal. That's how it should be. Why should Congress weigh in and block that process? Again, I believe that's government overreach. H.R. 1809, introduced by Representative Quigley, provides much-needed support to fishery science by reauthorizing funding for the United States Geological Survey's Great Lakes Fishery Research Program to continue its research supporting sustainable fisheries management, like identifying and combating invasive species like the Asian carp and sea lamprey, conducting surveys for sports fish management, and monitoring impacts of harmful algae blooms on fisheries resources. I hope we can move this legislation forward quickly to markup and then into law. It's bipartisan, and it's a good bill, should pass. Finally, H.R. 2316 extends the interest transfer authority from the Pittman-Robertson Wildlife Restoration Fund to the North American Wetland Conservation Act Fund. helping to ensure that more resources are available for conservation efforts. NACA has strong bipartisan support. Since this program's inception, $2.1 billion of NACA funding has resulted in over $4.3 billion additional investments in wetland conservation projects across almost 32 million acres of habitat. I support this bill, and I'd like to see it pass on the House floor. I don't know what the Senate's going to do. We never know what the Senate's going to do. I appreciate all of our witnesses here today who will help us understand the best ways to protect our wildlife and why investing in conservation is crucial for all Americans. I look forward to the discussion, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. I will now introduce our first panel. Excuse me. There you are. Good morning. I now recognize Ranking Member Huffman for his opening statement. Thank you,
Madam Chair. And Madam Chair, I think you know that Democrats would love to have an additional witness so that we could actually have our witnesses speak to both the bills we support and, unfortunately, the bills that we must oppose. But when we're limited to one witness, we're kind of stuck. And so I would love it if you would go back to the practice that I did when I chaired this committee, which was to reach out to the minority party and see if we could find some joint witnesses where you wouldn't have to be jammed into this Hobson's choice. But until then, I guess we will have snarky comments about, which witnesses the Democrats choose with their one lonely witness choice. And then I guess we will respond in kind by pointing out that the Republicans never want to call anyone from the administration to ever testify at their hearings, which is also a problem. But gosh, let's be better. Let's get beyond that kind of partisan stuff. We have 4 bills on the agenda today, and I want to focus on H.R. 839, a bill that unfortunately would block a carefully developed community-supported land protection plan from the Fish and Wildlife Service for the Muleshoe National Wildlife Refuge in West Texas. And before we hear a lot of overheated rhetoric about land grabs, let's set some facts here. Fish and Wildlife Service cannot seize land. It cannot pressure landowners. It may only acquire land, water, or other interests from willing sellers. Full stop. There is no land grab. That's a fiction designed to stir outrage, not an honest reflection of reality. But here we are. My Republican colleagues have brought another bill rooted in the same old hollow narrative where every conservation effort is cast as a government overreach and a conspiracy where public lands are treated like some kind of a looming threat instead of an intergenerational legacy. And the truth is just different. Muleshoe Land Protection Plan is a science-based voluntary initiative that offers landowners a new tool to manage their property while supporting conservation if they choose. It's the product of years of research, listening sessions, and direct engagement with the very people who live and work in the region. The plan doesn't restrict landowner rights, it expands them. It gives landowners a choice to conserve habitat for birds and wildlife, to be compensated for doing it, and to be part of something larger than their own fence lines. That is not a threat, it's a partnership. And it's exactly the kind of win-win conservation we should be lifting up, the kind that Republicans used to celebrate, and we shouldn't be tearing it down here today. That's especially true considering that the southern High Plains ecosystem the Muleshoe aims to conserve is one of the most threatened on the planet. Let's be clear, this isn't just about one refuge. The bill is part of a broader campaign by fringe organizations like American Stewards of Liberty, groups that specialize in fear-mongering, misinformation, and dismantling environmental protections under the guise of defending freedom. And I say to my colleagues and to the communities watching, don't fall for it. The National Wildlife Refuge System is the world's largest network of lands and waters dedicated to conserving wildlife. These refuges are not just lines on a map, they're vital sanctuaries for migratory birds, endangered species, entire ecosystems that sustain our air, water, and climate, and for millions of Americans, they're right next door. Our wildlife refuges are also economic engines. Refuges draw hunters, anglers, fishers, outdoor recreationalists, photographers, bird watchers, and tourists. They support local businesses, generate a lot of rural jobs, and increase county revenues. Many even incorporate agriculture because conservation and working lands don't have to be at odds. And that's why National Wildlife Refuges have long enjoyed bipartisan support. They're shaped by local voices, managed with state and community input, and built on a model of collaboration that works. Muleshoe is no exception. There, landowners, hunters, conservationists, and residents have come together to protect a fragile and vital landscape. We're going to hear from one of those voices today, and we should be honoring that success, not politicizing and dismantling it. We should be expanding staffing and investing in the future of these places so that Americans, more Americans, can hunt, hike, farm, and enjoy them. So let's reject the fear-mongering and the politics. Let's stand with communities, and let's do our part to preserve our nation's special places for generations to come. I yield back.
Thank you. I will now introduce our first panel. As is typical with legislative hearings, the bill sponsors are recognized for 5 minutes each to discuss their bills. I now recognize Congressman Ezell for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Far too long, catfish farmers in Mississippi and the southeast region of the United States have been plagued by the burden of permits and processes implemented by big government who bend the knee to radical environmental groups. These environmental groups are either unaware of how their policies affect the livelihood of everyday working class Americans, or simply they just don't care. The double-breasted cormorant is a nuisance, plain and simple. They eat up to 1.5 pounds of fish a day, and even the Fish and Wildlife Service has classified them as opportunists and generalist feeders that prey on many species of fish. Still, farmers must jump through hoops to prevent these birds from eating their stock. Aquaculture farmers have been struggling for years with the importation of non-domestic catfish. Now, because of one single liberal court ruling, our catfish community loses up to $64 million annually. This loss is in addition to the burden of individual permits that is now in place of the national depredation order that existed for over a decade. My bill, H.R. 2293, the Cormorant Relief Act of 2025, reinstates the aquaculture depredation order to double-crested cormorants. This is nothing new. It's the same order that was easily reinstated in 2003, 2009, and 2014. Now, as a proud Mississippian, I am happy to welcome Mr. Chris McGlone, an award-winning catfish farmer and the president of Catfish Farmers of Mississippi. Chris is a wonderful representation of the state of Mississippi and catfish farmers alike. Chris, thank you for making the trip to Washington and speaking here today on behalf of this bill. And I'll have some questions at my time, and thank you, Madam Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize Congressman Hurd for 5 minutes.
Chairman Hageman, thank you very much for including my legislation, H.R. 2316, the Wetlands Conservation Access Improvement Act, in today's hearing. I also want to thank the committee staff for their support and my colleague, Representative Elfreth, for joining me in leading this important bipartisan effort. H.R. 2316 is a straightforward, targeted update to the Pittman-Robertson Wildlife Restoration Act. This is a landmark 1937 law that channels excise tax revenue from firearms, ammunition, and archery equipment into wildlife restoration, conservation, and hunter education. The bill simply extends the timeline for when the interest earned on these funds can be used to 2033, ensuring that more dollars will be available to support wetlands and waterfowl conservation projects through the North American Wetlands Conservation Act. That interest has averaged nearly $11 million a year since 2004, helping restore critical habitat and supporting healthy migratory bird populations across North America. This is a win for conservationists, and it's a win for sportsmen. American sportsmen have long been among our nation's greatest conservation advocates. This bill ensures their contributions continue to make a lasting impact on the lands and habitats that they care so deeply about. In addition, Madam Chairwoman, I would ask for unanimous consent to enter a letter from the North American Wetlands Conservation Council and a letter signed by 13 sportsmen and conservation groups in support of my legislation into the record.
That objection so ordered.
Thank you. I look forward to hearing from our witness, Mr. Anderson, today, and working with all of you to advance this common sense legislation through the committee process. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize Congressman Kit Quigley for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam
Welcome.
Chairman. Thank you for having me and for considering the bill, the Great Lakes Fishery Research Reauthorization Act. First, I'd like to thank my colleague, Mr. Representative Bill Huizenga, for his work on this bill and other issues important to the Great Lakes. The Great Lakes are a natural wonder of the world in every sense. They contain 20% of the world's fresh water. 40 million people in the U.S. and Canada rely on the Great Lakes for clean drinking water. But to get to the real issues at hand, we're here today to talk about the Great Lakes fisheries. The total value of commercial, recreational, and tribal fishing in the Great Lakes is at least $5 billion. The industry supports an estimated 75,000 jobs across the region. Research into the Great Lakes fishery provides us with data and information necessary to manage fish populations, conduct habitat maintenance, roll out educational programs, and more. For the last 5 years, this authorized program has provided funds for the U.S. Geological Survey and more specifically the Great Lakes Science Center to conduct scientific research and invest in new technology. My bill is a flat reauthorization of this program at $15 million per year through 2030. Researchers across the region rely on this data collected over decades to analyze trends, and reauthorizing this program will allow the Great Lakes Science Center to continue its research and provide data sets that are stable and reliable into the future. To underscore the importance of this program, I thought I'd bring an illustration of the problem. You may have noticed the poster behind me. This is a sea lamprey. If this graphic doesn't convince you that we don't want these suckers in the Great Lakes, I'm not sure what will. Their suction cup clamps on to our native fish and feeds on them, kind of like a giant great leech. One sea lamprey can kill 40 pounds of Great Lakes fish over a 12 to 18-month feeding period. And that's just one of the threats that we're currently up against. In the 1950s, the U.S. and Canada established the Great Lakes Fishery Commission to shore up our shared fisheries. Decades of overfishing, invasive species like the sea lamprey, and human impact on the lakes threaten the over 130 native species. There are over 20 fish species that have gone extinct in the Great Lakes over the last 2 centuries, and 61 species are currently threatened or endangered. For all those in the region who depend on the fishery for food, livelihood, and sport, it's critical that we continue to monitor the Great Lakes and our native fish species. Before this program was authorized 5 years ago, the USGS had pieced together funding from many different buckets to support this research. USGS and the Great Lakes Science Center had lagged far behind their peers in introducing 21st century technology to properly and effectively monitor the lakes. This patchwork funding model led to instability in the research programs and pulled resources from other programs. The Great Lakes Science Center is the only agency that conducts multi-jurisdictional, lake-wide scientific assessments, and it's crucial to protect and preserve this incredible resource and economic driver. The Great Lakes Science Center has field operations in 5 of the 8 Great Lakes states. It owns and operates a fleet of large research vessels that monitor the lakes and the fishery to ensure these crucial ecosystems stay healthy and productive. This bipartisan bill is about supporting the science needed to protect, sustain, and improve the economically indispensable and ecologically unique Great Lakes fishery. Madam Chair, it's been talked about the conflicts we have and disagreements we have, but there are so many reasons that we need to maintain the fishery for economic reasons, job reasons, natural reasons. These are the common grounds that we need to work with together because they're important for reasons that we all care about. And I truly thank you for the time today.
Thank you, and thank you for joining us. These are important issues. I now recognize Congressman Arrington for 5 minutes. Thank you for joining us today.
I thank the chair lady and ranking member for the opportunity to wave on to this committee. A little out of breath because I'm out of shape, for the record. We Ways and Means guys don't move around as much as you all do. I'm honored to be in the presence of two great men from West Texas and to have a little slice of God's country right here in the nation's capital. And so I give a hearty welcome to fourth-generation farmer, Mr. Brian Baker, and Mr. John Rowley, who is a successful car dealer. Both of them love this country. Both of them are proud rural Americans, but they're on different sides of this issue, Madam Chair. And that's healthy. I mean, this is what this process is all for. Robust debate in this democratic process. But private property rights, I think we all would agree, is a cornerstone of our free society and central to the free enterprise system that's blessed our nation with unparalleled prosperity. Here's my point, and here's my position on this for the people of West Texas who I represent, recognizing there are different views. The federal government, as my dad would put it, needs more public land like I need another hole in my head. This 30 by 30 initiative where we somehow think it's a good idea for the federal government to own a third of the land in these great United States, after all we have witnessed and experienced over the recent years, where the levers of power in this city have been weaponized against landowners from the 1,500 miles of rivers because of some endangered species whereby now those waters are not able to be utilized for irrigation to feed and clothe the American people. I've seen the Mexican mussel listed so that Texas couldn't put buoy barriers to defend itself when their federal government failed to do its job to provide for a common defense. I could go through a litany of grievances from waters of the U.S. and down the line where the federal government infringed, I believe, on our liberties. But as the budget chairman, we're $36 trillion in debt. We have World War levels of indebtedness. We are $2 trillion borrowing on the backs of our children every year, and we're paying now more in interest than we spend in all of national defense. And somehow, we think we need to spend more money on behalf of the taxpayers to buy up more land that we don't manage. We don't manage the land we have well, Madam Chair. And that causes problems. And so there are, as I said, a litany of reasons why I think it's a bad idea. I think our private property owners, like Mr. Rowley and everybody else, should be able to buy whatever property they want and transact how they please with their money. But I am a fiduciary of tax dollar on behalf of the United States citizens from every state in the union. And I think it is tremendously wasteful and unnecessary to use it to buy up more federal lands. So that's my strong position. 10,000% increase in a wildlife refuge on the plains of West Texas. 10,000% increase. Like a hole in our head. I yield.
Thank you, Mr. Arrington. I understand your position. I come from a state where 48% of the surface estate is owned by the federal government. Last year, we had catastrophic forest fires, losing a total between the forest fires and prairie fires over 800,000 acres. We need a federal government that is more responsive and responsible in managing the resources they already have, not adding to that. So I appreciate your perspective here today. I want to thank the members for your testimony, and I'm now going to introduce our second panel. Mr. Chris McGlon, President of Delta Cat Fisheries in Greenwood, Mississippi. Mr. John Rowley, a landowner in Lubbock, Texas. Mr. Brian Baker, President of the Board of Directors for the Texas Producers Cooperative in Sudan, Texas. And Mr. Mick Anderson, a board member and Colorado Volunteer State Policy Chair of Ducks Unlimited in Aurora. Let me remind the witnesses that under committee rules, they must limit their oral statements to 5 minutes, but their entire statement will appear in the hearing record. To begin your testimony, please press the button on the microphone, and we use timing lights. When you begin, the light will turn green. When you have 1 minute left, it will turn yellow, and at the end of the 5 minutes, the light will turn red, and I will ask you to please complete your statement. I will also allow all witnesses to testify before the members begin their questions. I now recognize Mr. McGlone for 5 minutes.
Chair Hageman, Ranking Member Hall, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today in support of HB 2293, the Cormorant Relief Act of 2025. As a lifelong catfish farmer, I have firsthand experience with the challenges faced by catfish farmers, particularly the economic and operational burden imposed by double-crested cormorants. I also want to thank Representative Azil, Representative Thompson, and the other sponsors of this bill for bringing forward this common-sense approach to helping fish farmers while also helping Fish and Wildlife Services better manage healthy migratory bird population. Our family catfish farm of 450 acres located in Humphreys County, Mississippi. We are truly a family operation with my wife and my 2 children working along with me. It is more than just a job for us, it is our life. I can say with confidence that this is much of the same throughout the catfish country. The current system of individual depredation permits is inefficient, costly, and fails to provide timely relief to farmers. Restoring the National Depredation Order would allow for better management of bird problems, reduce financial strain on both farmers and the Fish and Wildlife Services. Catfish farming is an economically intensive endeavor. This bill will restore a more efficient approach to managing bird depredation of fish farms. Catfish farming is a capital-intensive industry requiring significant investment in infrastructure, feed, labor, and disease management. The average cost of production for farm-raised catfish averages around $1.10 a pound, depending on factors such as feed prices, water management, and labor cost. Feed alone accounts for 50% of total production cost. Additionally, labor cost, water quality management, disease prevention, and bird harassment create additional cost. Despite these high costs, catfish farmers must compete in a volatile market where price fluctuates, imported seafood competition, and regulatory hurdles impact profitability. The added burden of cormorant depredation further strains farm operations, making it imperative to implement cost-effective bird management strategies. Beyond financial constraints, catfish farmers face numerous operational challenges. Maintaining optimum oxygen levels require constant monitoring and investment both day and night. Rising commodity prices impact feed affordability, making cost reduction strategies essential. And finally, bird depredation is a constant challenge on catfish farms, including my own. These birds can consume up to 1.5 pounds of fish per day, which could be anywhere from 10 to 30 fish per day. Cormorants typically fly in large groups of 50 to 200 birds per flock. Without constant pressure and harassment, we could lose thousands of catfish in just a few short days. This leads to millions of dollars in both losses and increased costs associated with harassing birds annually. In addition, disease outbreak spreads rapidly and are often complicated by wild bird activity on catfish farm. The average catfish farm spends $285 per acre on harassment measures, including labor, vehicle expense, and infrastructure maintenance. The cost of the catfish industry related to the bird depredation can be as high as $64 million annually. Despite these efforts, harassment alone does not completely resolve the problem. Under the current system of individual permits, each catfish farmer is required to make an application to the Fish and Wildlife Service for an individual permit to take a certain number of cormorants. Fish and Wildlife Service must administer and approve or deny each application with varying numbers of take birds. This creates a patchwork of guessing by Fish and Wildlife Service where the main problems will occur in a given year. For example, I might not have as much challenge with cormorants next year, but my neighbor a few miles down the road could be covered up with birds. He won't have enough to take under his permit while I have more than I need. Individual permits also require unneeded inefficiencies for Fish and Wildlife Services in administering thousands of individual permits as opposed to a national order which allow for the same monitoring and protection of the overall health of the cormorant population while allowing Fish and Wildlife Services to use limited resources in critical areas. Under a national depredation order, farmers are still required to keep track of take numbers, and Fish and Wildlife Services must work with USDA Wildlife Services to adequate population number of cormorants to ensure no harm comes to the overall health of the species. It is important to note that as part of this application process, farmers are required to have in place an approved bird harassment plan We rely on harassment techniques such as noise cannons, pyrotechnics, and constant patrol to deter cormorants. This will not change under our national depredation order. It will always be a last resort to take a problem bird. More than 85% of the U.S. is imported. The seafood trade deficit is the $25 billion annually. Domestic aquaculture needs assistance, all the assistance we can get. This bill does not have anything to do with trade, but it does fix an unneeded layer of regulation of U.S. catfish farmers. The Cormorant Relief Act presents a common sense solution to challenges faced by catfish farmers and other farmers throughout the U.S. By restoring a national depredation order, producers can reduce operational costs, improve disease control, and enhance farm sustainability. I urge the committee to support this legislation, ensure that farmers have the tools necessary to safeguard their livelihood, and strengthen the U.S. seafood industry. Thank you for your time, and I welcome any questions from the committee.
Thank you, Mr. McGlone. I now recognize Mr. Rowley for 5 minutes.
Madam Chair, Ms. Ranking Member, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity for allowing me to be here today. It is my honor. My name is John Rowley. I worked in the Littlefield, Texas area for more than 45 years. I was a successful car dealer, and I'm an active rancher in the Littlefield area. I own 3,800 acres of land in Hockley, Bailey, and Lamb County, Texas, and have always been a thoughtful steward of the land. For example, I was recently recognized as a Lone Star Land Steward for my work I've done on my Little Las Vegas property, where I have restored nearly 1,400 acres back to native habitats, which have helped the local species flourish there. I've made efforts to make my land accessible for hunting and for educational activities. My 2,200-acre Little Las Vegas ranch sits on the eastern edge of the Yellow House Draw, an area described by Francisco Coronado in 1542 as the Casas de Amarillas due to the low yellow hills. The property is home to numerous quail, Texas horned lizards, mule deer, and whitetail deer. The property is grazed on as a needed basis through our periodic droughts and is leased for hunting. The first 380 acres I acquired were planted back to native grasses and wildflowers with funds intended to help preserve the lesser prairie chicken population in the area. Since then, additional restoration of old croplands have resulted in the establishment of more than 1,000 acres of native habitat across the landscape. In addition, the restoration of multiple playa lakes or playa wetlands on the property has enhanced its usability for ducks, cranes, geese, and migrating birds. The ranch has undertaken multiple efforts to make the property more suitable for wildlife, and by allowing 4-H groups access, Littlefield Independent School outdoor education opportunities, and an all-women's and new hunter dove hunt. In addition, the ranch allows access for dove trapping and banding conducted by Texas Wildlife Department. I am also a Republican, a strong, staunch advocate of private property rights. In my mind, no one, and particularly not the federal government, should have the right to tell me what property I can sell or cannot sell. It's a fundamental part of our rights in America to retain freedom to do with the land as we see fit. Whether it is I sell it for conservation or development, landowners should be free to use or develop their property as they see fit and should not be told by another party that I may sell or give an interest in my land if I so choose. That's important to me, being an American, being what Americans all about. And frankly, it's why I'm here today to oppose H.R. 839 that would prohibit the implementation of the land protection plan for the Muleshoe National Wildlife Refuge. After going through public process and consulting with partners nearly a year ago, the service released its final findings. The updated plan made it for a significantly larger boundary for the service, aiming to conserve 700,000 acres. This broad landscape approach enables the service to work with landowners on a voluntary basis. and address the significant changes of habitat fragmentation and other impacts across the landscape of the southern high plains. The land is to protect the beautiful animals like the sandhill crane and pronghorn. Congress should not be in the business of telling landowners to whom they can sell or donate their land to. If I want to sell my land to an oil company, a developer, or the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, that is my right to. This bill would unfairly restrict that. The rights of other Americans to exercise the control over their lands, I believe, is a bad policy, and would represent an infringement on my property rights. The thing that's so critical on this, it's volunteer, and you can do an easement or you can sell it. You don't have to go all in. There's a lot of attributes to this land, and I believe that's why I'm for it. You can make your own decision. That's what I'm all about. Thank you so very much.
Thank you for your testimony. I now recognize Mr. Baker for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairwoman Hageman, Ranking Member Hoyle, distinguished members. I would like to begin by thanking you for allowing me to testify on behalf of H.R. 839, introduced by Representative Arrington, and to share my story with you today. My name is Brian Baker. I live in the West Texas Panhandle in a small town called Sudan, Texas, and I'm a fourth-generation cotton farmer. After graduating from Texas Tech University with a degree in agricultural economics, I moved back home and started farming with my dad and granddad. I farm around 3,500 acres, and I still farm some land that my great-granddad broke out of natural grass in the early 1900s. I'm very proud to still be able to work that land. I have 2 stepkids, Libby and Austin, and I'm very honored to be part of their lives. In addition to being a farmer, I also serve on several boards, including the Board of Directors for Texas Producers Cooperative Gin, or TPC, where I've been the board president since 2016. TPC represents 492 patron farmers, and I'm their voice today as well. TPC consists of 2 cotton ginning plants, an insurance company with 2 locations, a fertilizer, chemical, agronomy division. We have a fully stocked farm supply store, a tire shop, a mechanic shop, fuel division, and even a barber shop. TPC employs 43 full-time employees, and we add 48 seasonal employees during our cotton harvest time. Many of these seasonal employees are lower-income individuals and are dependent on this seasonal work, which for several makes up the majority of their annual income. Texas Producers Co-op, on average, returns $2 to $2.5 million to our patrons in the form of a dividend. Most of that profit is coming from local cotton being gin. Most of these funds, which are returned to the producers, remain in our local community and are the lifeblood of our area. When farmers thrive, the economy thrives. The footprint of TPC's patrons extends approximately 60 miles in all directions from Sudan, with a large portion falling into the Biden administration's 30 by 30 land acquisition plan. As shown in the Muleshoe National Wildlife Refuge Land Protection Plan, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service approved a plan that would use taxpayer money to acquire an estimated 700,000 acres of West Texas land. If some or all of these 700,000 acres are removed from the farming production, an area roughly the size of the state of Rhode Island, it will cause a ripple effect that will be irreversible, as these acres will be permanently removed from production. This ripple effect will not only be devastating to the farmers and the employees of Texas Producers Co-op, but also the many local businesses, including banks, grocery stores, and restaurants. Local schools, the heartbeat of these small towns, will also be impacted. Sudan Independent School District, a national blue ribbon school, is one of the schools that falls under this land grab. Sudan ISD has one of the largest school districts in the South Plains, and it covers approximately 583 square miles. There are currently around 450 students, 46 teachers, and 79 total staff employed. According to Scott Harrell, Sudan ISD superintendent, Sudan ISD has an annual revenue of a little more than $7,362,000 and spends approximately $17,000 per student. With 700,000 acres potentially being vacated from private landowners and taxpayers, there will be multiple economic losses, including the reduction in the number of teachers, bus drivers, and staff, as fewer children will be enrolled in the local schools. After all, there will be nobody left to live and farm on these lost acres. My family has called Sudan home for over 100 years, so there's an emotional aspect to this expansion for me. My mother taught 4th grade for 40 years in Sudan. My sister has taught 2nd grade in Sudan for 20 years. I have 2 nephews, Cal and Nick, who attend Sudan ISD today, and I'm fighting for them to always have a place to come home to and be able to call it home. Congressman Arrington understands the destructive impact this plan will have not only on Sudan and our region, but on Texas and the entire United States. Because if a 700,000 acre land expansion is allowed to happen in Texas, where the entire state is over 95% privately owned, it can happen anywhere. I'm very honored to be here today, and this is why I support HR 839 to defend the way of life for a place that I and thousands of hardworking West Texans call home. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. I now recognize Mr. Anderson for 5 minutes of testimony.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My name is Mikkel Anderson. I'm from Aurora, Colorado, which for those of you who don't know is about 4 hours south of Madam Chair's and about 3 hours east of Mr. Hurd. So we're all in the same beautiful Rocky Mountain area. I'm a retired professional water resources engineer, recently retired, still trying to adjust to that. 30-year volunteer for Ducks Unlimited. I'm on the board of directors for that organization, as well as their conservation programs advisory committee and their public policy committee. Currently, I'm the state public policy chair for the state of Colorado. And I thought as I was trying to prepare my remarks, I thought, well, if I was sitting in your seats, what would I need to know about this bill, and why would I want to listen to me talk about it? But I think that one of the questions I would ask is, what's really being asked here? What am I being asked to vote for? And as was eloquently described by Mr. Hurd, this is not something new. This is a reauthorization. We know what these funds do. We know how they work. We merely want to reauthorize this to extend it to 2033. So we're not talking about unintended consequences. We know what's going to happen. We know how it's going to happen, and importantly, we know how we're going to pay for it. The Pittman-Robertson money is actually historically, in my written remarks, I talked about the fact that sportsmen almost 100 years ago advocated for this tax. A little strange feeling these days, but we advocated for it so we'd have the money to make the kind of improvements that were necessary for our wildlife and for that habitat. And we want to continue doing that. And the interest from this fund then would, from the sportsmen's organizations and purchases, would go to NACA. And why NACA? Well, NACA's also not new. It's a very effective program at habitat for wetlands. Well, why wetlands? Wetlands are incredibly complex locations of ecology that have a lot of diversity, but they're all, obviously Ducks Unlimited, we're interested in the waterfowl. They have to have wetlands, but wetlands are so much more. And I'd like to just comment just briefly on that besides the wildlife, wetlands are huge impacts on water quality. They trap sediment, they trap nutrients, they keep those from going down into our surface and aquifer, our surface waters and aquifer. They delay runoff to reduce flooding effects, and all without having to be managed or operated by someone. It's just the natural process. The wildlife is more than just waterfowl. 90% of the birds that migrate use wetlands at some point in their life. They may not nest there, they may not winter there, but they use it in migration. If you were in Colorado right now, I could take you out and show you a huge variety of birds that won't be there a week, maybe a month from now. They'll be migrated off into somewhere else, but they need those wetlands right now to make their migration successful. That's what NACA's doing. It's making wetlands. The people who are in this panel because of the fisheries issues need to understand that there's a great amount of science coming out right now that coastal wetlands in particular are crucial to our fisheries for rearing the small fish and shellfish on the Gulf Coast. Those wetlands there protect against hurricane storm damage, and in the process are just these great nurseries for a wide variety of fish. Those of the members who are on the West Coast, they're discovering that that's part of the problem with salmon not being produced is the fact that they haven't had the coastal wetlands to rear in before going out to the ocean. They go out too small, they're too vulnerable. If they have a wetland, rather than just being flushed out, they're larger and they come back bigger. And then there's a huge amount of recreation that occurs in wetlands now. That's also an advantage of what's being funded by NACA. NACA as a program, I mean, it's really what we're talking about is funding NACA. And NACA as a program is fantastic in the sense that it is such an efficient and effective program that I think, so from the standpoint, if I was in your shoes and deciding whether or not to vote for this, I'm not voting just for more waterfowl. I'm voting for all those other aspects as well, and I would encourage you to consider that when you consider your vote. So, Madam Chair, thank you very much for this opportunity. I appreciate that, and I look forward to any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson, for your testimony. I want to thank each of you for being here today and providing us with this valuable information. I will now recognize members for 5 minutes each for questioning, and I'm going to begin with myself. Mr. Baker, some of my colleagues on this committee seem to believe that the only way to benefit any species or a variety of species is for folks to sell their land to the federal government. Do you believe that to be the case?
Thank you for the question. Personally, no. I fall back that farmers are original stewards. We take care of the land because we have a vested interest in it. We want to leave it better than we found it. So I think that farmers are better with that as far as taking care of that. So.
Why would the Mule Shoe expansion plan hurt your community?
For some of the things I mentioned earlier, number one, our school district falls really large into that expansion area. So there's going to be a reduction in kids there. There's also the tax roll will be affected tremendously if all these acres are taken out of production. So that's going to be a larger impact and a higher tax rate for the farmers that are left outside of this targeted area. They're going to have to pay more. So it's going to cost them more as far as the tax roll goes. For one example, the other example is our co-ops and our businesses are all going to hurt from this because there's not going to be anybody left out there to farm those acres. So.
Well, and again, being from a state that has such an enormous federal footprint, I can tell you that those concerns are valid, they're real. It has a huge impact. We often talk about PILT or payment in lieu of taxes. I refer to that as poverty in lieu of taxes or pennies in lieu of taxes. It just simply does not make up for the economic addition that is associated with private industry, private production, private development. And as I mentioned in my opening statement, the National Wildlife Refuge System has a $2.65 billion deferred maintenance backlog. Mr. Baker, as a private citizen living near the existing Mule Shoe National Wildlife Refuge, do you agree that the service should focus on addressing this backlog rather than increasing the amount of land that it manages?
Yes, ma'am. I feel like if they're going to try to expand this out, it's going to, like I said, not only hurt our tax base, but it's also going to hurt these local schools and those businesses out there. But I know that there's a thing called the refuge. Let me think a minute. A Wildlife Refuge Fund, which is voted on by Congress, and that's when they're allotted so much money to spend on their taxes. And I know last year, the Mule Shoe Wildlife Refuge only paid $2,666 to the local tax, while I have a friend that has a neighboring farm right next to the refuge. He paid a little more now. He paid $1.65 an acre, whereas the Mule Shoe Wildlife Refuge only paid 41 cents an acre. So I see that only 25% of that tax base is going to get paid the way it is if all this goes into a wildlife refuge.
You know, and I'm a strong advocate for private property rights. As a private attorney, I worked for landowners and extensively, probably one of the biggest parts of my practice. And while we have the right to buy and sell land, we don't necessarily have the right for the federal government to buy our land. And I think that that's one of the significant issues we're dealing with here today. Mr. McGlon, I'd like to turn to you now. And Congressman Ezel's legislation would reinstate an aquaculture depredation order that was vacated as a result of litigation in a court order. Part of that litigation centered around concerns that the continued use of depredation orders could have a negative population level effect on the species. Can you explain to the committee the steps you would have to follow under the depredation order to help ensure that there is not a negative population level effect?
Yes, ma'am, and thank you. So our first choice is to harass the bird, which we ride around in the truck, try to just keep them up out of the water. So if that doesn't work, then we shoot a pyrotechnic like a flame in the air. And if that doesn't work, then we have propane gun cannons that we use that just make a big loud sound. So our first line of attack is just harassment, just to try to get the bird off of our farm and back to a roost area, into a lake or a break or anything close by. But, you know, when we get to the last resort, lethal is the only way we can actually get them off the farm at times.
And what are the reporting requirements that you have?
Oh, we apply for the permit and we make an educated guess on how many birds we think we will take that year. And then we just return, you know, keep up with every bird we take, and we have to turn it in.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you for your responses and for your engagement. The chair now recognizes Mr. Huffman for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Rowley, I'd like to start with you. Welcome. Thanks for traveling to Washington to be part of this hearing and providing your honest opinion of H.R. 839. And I'm really impressed with the way you have managed your property and the thoughtfulness and stewardship that's gone into all of that. You noted in your testimony that you've restored a lot of property for conservation, and you've chosen to do that. Why did you choose to prioritize conservation over other things you could have done with your land?
I don't know. I mean, I grew up in the Midwest, and my grandfather everything was clean. You couldn't, there was no wildlife. And I bought my first place that we restored for the prairie chickens. It was amazing to watch those little guys. And we planted the grass that would be suitable for them and did that. And so we could see improvement. The best thing I did, the mule deer were migrating into our area. And I run water out, fresh water out every day for the mule deer. And now we've got the herds have gone from 3 to 29, 17, whatever. So it's, you know, we hunt with binoculars often. And my wife and I love going out there. So it's nice. I like it. It's a passion.
Sounds beautiful. I imagine that all of that required a significant investment of your time and money, and you decided not to lease the land for oil and gas, which limits the potential income that you might generate from it. Is that all correct?
We don't have oil and gas on that one. I've got another farm
Okay.
that does have some oil wells.
All right. Can the Muleshoe Land Protection Plan offer additional financial incentives to property owners like you who want to use their land for conservation?
Well, the deal that I understand is the easements. I've got a friend who's south of the refuge, and he's a cattle farmer, and he's going to put some of his pasture in the easements because they're not going to allow, he's not going to allow the grass to get too low because then you lose everything. And they're good. They're good stewards of the land. It's good to have another set of eyes look at your place. And so he's going to put a lot of his property in an easement. He's not selling his land.
Right.
They're not grabbing it. They're not stealing it. He just wants the easement for the cattle, for doing what he's been doing for years.
So when we hear, as we just did, about 700,000 acres permanently removed from production, nobody would be left to pay any taxes or go to schools or do anything like that, that doesn't necessarily have to be the case at all under this plan, right?
This easement, he still owns the land. He still pays the property. He still puts the cattle on it. I mean,
Kids still go to school.
whatever you want to do, but
Yeah.
he gets a little help, and he gets a little money up front to help him improve the land. That's it.
Does the conservation of your land have any negative impacts on your neighbor's land?
Well, my neighbors kind of feel the same way I do. Two of them do, and it's really been helpful. We've got a really nice little area here. My property's 2,200 acres, and my lady rancher next to me's got, I don't know, 450. And between all of us, we've got a good significant. We need a range. They need a range. You know, wildlife move, so they can't just have one little place.
Well, thank you very much. It does seem to me that blocking this plan just because it might align with the Biden administration's biodiversity initiative is short-sighted. And a lot of the rhetoric and other assertions we've heard today really don't bear much of a connection with reality, and your testimony helps highlight the very sensible way in which this plan could move forward in a way that works very well for the community and private landowners. So thank you for that. Mr. McGlon, the Fish and Wildlife Service isn't testifying here today, so I guess I have you, and I want to just ask you a couple of yes or no questions about the service's position on HR 2293. Has the service ever denied one of your depredation permit applications for managing cormorants? And believe me, I understand why you would need to manage the cormorant, given your line of work.
No, they have not ever denied one.
Okay, thank you.
Of mine.
Have you talked with the service about your concerns with the current permit process?
We have,
You have?
yes.
All right. Has the service expressed recent concerns about their ability to provide depredation permits? In other words, under this administration, do you expect that the service would continue to say yes when you need a depredation permit?
We hope so, but I can't answer for them.
Well, they have so far, right?
Yes, they have,
Under both Republican and Democratic administrations.
correct.
Yeah. If timeliness of permits is the issue, would a fully staffed migratory bird office help to speed up those permit times? In other words, you need someone to answer the phone when you call with a question. You need someone to process your permit application when you submit it. Probably helps to have actual people staffing the office. I'm sort of answering my own question, but would you agree with that?
I would agree.
Yeah, thank you. Madam Chair, we're happy to try to work across the aisle to figure out this issue, but without Fish and Wildlife Service testimony and proper oversight by Congress to ensure the Migratory Bird Office is fully staffed, I don't know how we can take this bill seriously. I hope the majority will work with us to get answers to some of the basic questions before moving the bill forward, and with that, I yield.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Ms. Radewagen for 5 minutes of questioning. Talo Falava.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman and Ranking Member, for holding this important hearing today, and I want to thank the witnesses for being here. Mr. McGlon, the commercial tuna industry makes up roughly 85% of American Samoa's gross domestic product and serves as a main economic driver for American Samoans. While my family and neighbors do not have to compete with double-crested cormorants, many are familiar with overburdensome and challenging regulations that hamper fishermen's ability to do their jobs. When it comes to cormorant management, how would increased flexibility benefit cities and towns like your community in Mississippi?
Just being able to manage the population will basically, it gives us more survivability on our farm with our stocking. So that's more, right now we're losing 5 to 10% of our crop every year just to bird depredation. So that's less income for us, less income for the community and everyone around.
And in part of your testimony, you emphasize the importance of competing in a market where costs of production can be high and there's fierce competition from seafood importers. Can you tell us how improved cormorant management would alleviate some of those concerns and strengthen local economies?
It would. Like I said, we would have a better survival rate on our farm, and it would increase our yields.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Ms. Hoyle for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, thank you all for coming here to testify today. It's important that we hear from people who are experts and who have real-life experience. Mr. Rowley, would you like to expand a little bit? Again, like myself, it seems you believe that as a private property owner, it should be your choice to whom you sell your property, and you spoke to the values of why you wanted to have your land in conservation. But speak more to the values as a private property owner to make the decision of who you should sell your property to.
Well, I mean, no one helped me pay for the land. No one helped me pay the taxes. So I'm very adamant about, I'll do what I want. It's my land, and that's what's going to happen. So I don't know, we've all got the same feelings in one way, shape, or another, but if someone wants to buy it from me and then put it in conservation, who am I to tell them they can't do that? I can't do that.
Thank you. Now, I would like to ask a question of Mr. Anderson. I'm a big fan of Ducks Unlimited and the work that you've done across this country with wetlands. Specifically, I've seen what's happened in Oregon, and it's really important. So wetland conservation often gets talked about in terms of environmental impact, but it also has significant economic benefits for local communities. Can you share how wetland conservation boosts local economies?
Yes, be glad to. There's a lot of recreational activity that occurs around wetlands, and particularly those that are enhanced in a way to increase access, like the suggested in the title of the act. But I'm trying to see if I can get access to some of my notes. It's just one. I will say one with the NACA program. It does require a match, a local match, just so during the construction activity associated with the improvements, that alone can bring a significant amount of money to the location, the state or local location. I think in Oregon itself, there have been almost $100 million worth of matching money that's been provided in addition to the grant. I know, although I'm not intimately familiar with Oregon projects, in some of the other locations, we often attract much more than just 50% match. I've personally been involved in a program in Colorado that had a match that exceeded 10 times the partner money compared to the federal money. So in many ways, we see the NACA money acting like a seed money for that activity. And then once the project is completed, a lot of times they have the water resource benefits, the water quantity benefits that I talked about earlier, can yield additional economic advantages as well. In Colorado, as an example, we use NACA projects to, in essence, put wildlife values on top of water resource projects. And in doing so, we've been able to enhance irrigation activity for increased agricultural production. In some cases, also municipal water supplies have benefited from the programs. And in doing so, we also obviously get the wildlife benefits associated with the water use.
That's great, thanks. And very briefly, NACA funds, which are supported by both Democrats and Republicans, are crucial for supporting conservation efforts. But as we look at efficiency and transparency, how does Ducks Unlimited, work with the Fish and Wildlife Services to ensure the NACA funds go to areas where conservation efforts will make the biggest difference for wildlife, clean water, and communities? Very briefly.
Yeah, one of the unique aspects of the NACA program is the way that it's designed to function, in that if some locale wishes for a project, they have to put in a proposal. A lot of times we at Ducks Unlimited create those proposals in conjunction with our partners. And those proposals then are all brought up here to Washington, D.C. for a committee which has representatives from the House, two representatives from the House, 2 representatives from the Senate, and secretaries of Interior and Agriculture, and the administrator of the EPA. So there's a tremendous amount of oversight in the beginning to take a look at the proposals. They're then ranked. They're ranked according to a scoring technique, which is aimed to try to maximize the dollars put to the maximum benefits. And so every cycle, every funding cycle goes through that ranking process. So it's a function of a well-known, transparent, supported program.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. And the chair now recognizes Mr. Ezell for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We've already vetted this bill from our friends across the aisle, and this bill is bipartisan. I just don't understand why Mr. Huffman refuses to acknowledge bills that are supported by both parties, but with that, I'll move on. Mr. McGlone, in your testimony, you touch on the economic burden that the Commonwealths place on you and your family who help run the farm. How have these Commonwealths impacted your operations and livelihood over the years?
Thank you. This is my 19th crop, so I've been doing this for a good while. So, and typically a cormorant, we face 5, 10, sometimes even 15% loss to bird depredation. So if you count that over basically 20 years of farming, I've given up hundreds of thousands of dollars of fish that I've purchased, put in the water, fed, kept alive through, and had major expenses in that I just do not have to sell at the end of the year. So it's a huge economic loss to us.
You also mentioned that the current system of individual permits is inefficient and fails to provide timely relief for you and other farmers. Can you please expand on the benefits of a national order, and how will the Commonwealth Relief Act of 2025 help fish farmers like yourself and protect your business?
Doing a national order would just simplify and make it a lot more efficient. And just like we said, we have to make an educated guess on how many birds to take that year. And that's just an unknown. We just don't know what the population is going to be in any given year. So, like I said, I could have more birds on my permit than I need. My neighbor could be out, or vice versa. And we just, under a national order, it would just be a lot better for our industry.
What message would you like to convey to members of Congress about the urgency of passing this legislation? And what will the repercussions be if the legislation is not passed?
I think this bill is very important to get passed. Even though the individual permits, they're better than nothing and they seem to work. Just because they work don't mean they could not be better, and a national depredation order would definitely be better overall for the catfish industry.
Thank you. And, we need to get this done. This is very important, not only to my state, but for the country. And, like I say, we have bipartisan support for this, and it should be, let's get this thing done. So thank you for that, Madam Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, and I agree with you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Gray for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Chair and Ranking Member, for holding this hearing, and thank you to the witnesses for joining us here today. As most of you know, adequate water supplies are crucial for wetlands, including both managing current conservation efforts and flooding agricultural lands. The region that I represent, the San Joaquin Valley, produces over 40% of the nation's fruit and vegetable supply and over 90% of global production for a number of crops. In the last half century, the focus in our region has largely been on conservation and habitat, and we've done very little to grow our water supply. It's important to conserve wetlands for the preservation of species in the region while considering the economic impacts such efforts entail. And there's probably, when I'm often asked the 3 most important issues in my district, the answer is water, water, and water. Sufficient access to water supply has been our biggest challenge for decades. And currently, farmers in my district are losing real access to water that's critical to the survival of the farms and to producing the very food that Americans depend on. The reality is the Central Valley's agriculture economy requires both access to water, but also respect for wildlife. It's not really one or the other, and too often that's a false choice put in front of us in these jobs. I'm committed to finding a balance where farmers have the necessary water they need to sustain our thriving agricultural community while both protecting wetlands and wildlife. My district's home to Grasslands Water District, which delivers water to one of the largest wetlands in the Central Valley. These wetlands are a key habitat for the migration of the waterfowl species and vital for their protection. For many years, in collaboration with public and private partners, including Ducks Unlimited, the Grasslands Water District has secured grant funding through the North American Wetlands Conservation Act for the conservation of these vital wetlands. However, additional funding is still needed to ensure long-term conservation efforts. Mr. Anderson, how does funding from the Pittman-Robertson Wildlife Restoration Act ensure local partners like the Grasslands Water District can secure necessary funding to support these efforts in the Central Valley?
Thank you for the question. I actually know the grasslands, and it's a beautiful spot. And it's pristine in many ways, one of the few wetlands left in California that is actually pristine. The NACA would have to, well, as in the past, all the proposals to do some activity in the grasslands or other wetlands in California have to go through the proposal process. They have historically done very well in the proposal process because of the critical nature of those wetlands relative to the wildlife there. But all of our NACA activities, NACA-funded activities, are done in close collaboration with other water users in the West because of the nature that you describe of it being a scarce commodity. And it's a collaborative process, not a combative process, and it's not, we don't look at it as a win-lose process, but we look at it as win-win. And I think that the work we've done with NACA in grasslands is very typical and indicative of our approach in that regard. That we see the farmers and ranchers as partners in this process, not as opponents. So the concept is to collaborate.
Thank you. My understanding is that the Trump administration's federal funding freeze has paused a number of grants allocated through the Conservation Act. Have you heard from organizations about their grant funding being paused?
I'm not intimately familiar with that, but there have been some issues associated with uncertainty. My apologies. There have been some uncertainties associated with how the grant process is going to move forward, but I don't have anything definitive to add to that right now.
Well, thank you. Look forward to working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support funding avenues for state and federal conservation efforts, as well as advanced water infrastructure. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield back my time.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Representative Crank for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate that. I'm an outdoorsman and sportsman and spent my life doing that. And we probably won't, I'm hoping my wife isn't listening to this, but I've spent an awful lot of money on conservation through my license fees. But I think people don't understand the hunting and recreation community contributes a lot to economic activity at national, state, and local level. But according to a 2022 report by the Sportsman's Alliance, hunters generated $45.2 billion in direct revenue, and that's more than the gross domestic product of 121 countries. They also contributed nearly $38 million per day in state, local, and federal taxes. And in Colorado alone, 722,370 hunters spent $1.6 billion on hunting-related purchases, and a portion of that revenue supports wildlife agencies and conservation efforts. And the hunting industry doesn't just generate economic value, it plays a critical role in conserving habitat and supporting species restoration. Through the Pittman-Robertson Act, hunters and shooters pay an excise tax on guns and ammunition, and this money funds wildlife conservation, hunting and shooting access, habitat restoration, hunter safety and education programs, and recreational shooting accounts for roughly 80% of the revenue in the Pittman-Robertson Fund. However, when firearms, ammunition, or archery equipment sales decline, so does funding for conservation. And of course, the same principle applies to oil and gas revenue, where energy production is restricted. Funding for education, habitat restoration, and local government also declines. Just a little economic lesson for some. Many people don't realize that sportsmen and women fund up to 80%, and in some cases, some states, 100% of state fish and wildlife agency budgets. So there's a lot of lip service about supporting conservation, and I hear it a lot. I get lectured about it a lot, but the funding for conservation comes out of my wallet as a sportsman. And that's the reality. There's no group that funds it like the hunting and shooting community does, because they can't. While other groups shy away from this responsibility, the sporting community embraces it. And we're proud of our role in protecting and managing America's natural resources. And I recently led a letter with my Republican colleagues in Colorado, including Mr. Hurd, who sits next to me, opposing Senate Bill 3 in Colorado, which threatens the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding citizens. If signed into law, it would have far-reaching impacts on our recreational shooting and hunting communities, and it reduced firearm sales. If it's passed, it will reduce firearm sales, and that will inevitably lead to less revenue for the Pittman-Robertson Fund, weakening the very conservation efforts that bill sponsors claim to support in Colorado. I'll ask Mr. Anderson, and thank you for joining us, Mr. Anderson. I know you're very familiar with Colorado, and thank you for being here. To see the continued growth in revenue in the Pittman-Robertson account, is it important for the states and federal government to implement policies that foster access to hunting, shooting, and the equipment necessary to participate?
Well, it's in Colorado, I think Pittman-Robertson funding itself is I think something like 40% of the state budget for the Parks and Wildlife. It's a huge impact on that, and the way it's as maybe you know, maybe you don't know, the way it's distributed in among the different states is it's by the size of the state and by the number of active licenses in that state, so that the states that have more hunting licenses get more Pittman-Robertson money. So if you suppress, not only if you suppress the sales of guns, but if you suppress the access and the ability of people to hunt in there, and so they choose not to get a license, you continue to chip away at your revenue sources from a state standpoint. And there's been some discussion among the sporting community, sportsmen's conservation communities, about how to potentially replace those funds in the event that it happens as you described our concern. But there's not a good quick answer existing there right now. So it's definitely, as sales go down, it would definitely put pressure.
Thank you. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And the chair now recognizes the chairman of the Natural Resources Committee, Mr. Westerman, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. I can relate to my friend from Colorado on, and I guess I could kind of rephrase Tug McGraw's famous quote about how he spends his money, but I spend 90% of my money on guns, ammo, and fishing equipment, and the other 10% I'll probably waste. But we all, I think, have a great appreciation for the outdoors, and I want to thank the other congressman from Colorado, Mr. Hurd, for his work on the Wetlands Conservation and Improvement Act. We know that NACA is an incredibly important program. It's very important to my home state of Arkansas, where 100,000 duck hunters or waterfowl hunters come each year to experience waterfowl hunting in our very pristine wetlands habitat. Mr. Anderson, I'm not going to ask you to compare Colorado and Arkansas duck hunting, but I would ask you to explain how transferring the interest accrued on unobligated Pittman-Robertson funds to NACA, how can that foster a cooperative and beneficial relationship between states and the waterfowl conservation community?
Well, I would make an analogy that it's the elk hunters in Colorado that are your Arkansas duck hunters come to our state to hunt elk. But in terms of NACA, to answer your question directly, this bill is to augment the NACA funds from the Pittman-Robertson Act Trust Fund, and every dollar that can go into the NACA program is going to be beneficial, at least twice as much because of the match requirements, probably more like 3 or 4 times as much, and that enables us to work cooperatively with all the interests, all the sportsmen's interests. But as I explained, I don't think you were in the room, but I know you know very well that those NACA program requires a proposal. The proposals are competitive. They're distributed among the states as a function of the ranking system. Your state continues to rank very well because of the nature of your habitat there. But I think that the sportsman's conservation community is quite satisfied that the proposal process itself does a very good job of distributing by need on the funds, and so they put the improvements and investments in the areas where they're going to do the most good for the species.
My colleague, Congressman Ezell from Mississippi, has also done work on a waterfowl issue with H.R. 2293, the Cormorant Relief Act, or also known as water turkeys in Arkansas. I hear from a lot of constituents back home about the destructive impact of the double-crested cormorants and how the current permitting structure is unworkable and ineffective. I've been up the Great Lakes area with other members of Congress and looked at the issue that cormorants create with smallmouth fry and walleye fry, and it's like they go do damage up there and then they migrate south and really make it hard for our catfish and bait farmers to make a living. Mr. McGlann, can you explain to the committee why the current permitting structure is unworkable?
Thank you, and don't necessarily say that I would say it's unworkable. It's just a little inefficient, and we could simplify it and just make it easier. Where we have issues with it is, like I said, we don't know the population numbers that are going to come down each year, and it's not necessarily just the migratory population. We're starting to get a resident population also. So we have the cormorants staying year-round on the farm, where typically 15 years ago it was from November to all the way to May. But we just need a national, depredation order to be able to take birds when necessary off the farm.
Thank you. And Mr. Baker, I quickly want to ask you, would you feel pressured to sell your property if your neighbors begin to sell their lands to the federal government because of the checkerboard effect it would create?
Yeah, I could see where some panic selling might take place. Maybe the decrease in the property value because of this expansion of this might cause more tax to be paid for the guys that are outside that circle. So yeah, I could see definitely some panic selling taking place out of that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm out of time.
Wonderful. The chair now recognizes Mr. Webster for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I only have one question I can think of. This is for Mr. McGlawn. Aquaculture is important in my state of Florida, an important industry, and a lot of things happen there about that. And it's the problem is has been already said a couple of times, and that is the federal intervention especially with the Endangered Species Act and misapplication of that, and improper use of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. All of that kind of hampers the growth of the industry. And can you tell me how Representative Ezel's bill would streamline the permitting and allow for growth in the industry?
Yes, sir, and thank you. Basically, Fish and Wildlife Services would approve one permit instead of thousands each year. So just be time-wise, they would be able to just to simplify the process and make it more efficient. And if the permit is more available to us and easily available to us, we can control the population of birds, and, you know, that's just more fish that we have to sell on the farm every year. That's less fish that the birds are eating. So that in turn will help the industry grow.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Would you yield to the chair the remainder of your time? To me? Thank you. I just wanted to send a message from Representative Jody Arrington, and he just wanted to make sure that everyone understood that the critical habitat that he is interested in preserving is the freedom-loving rural Americans, and the endangered species he's interested in protecting are the farmers and ranchers. So I thought that that was a message well worth providing to everyone here today, and the chair now recognizes Mr. Hurd for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman. Mr. Anderson, I know you said that you were recently retired, but it looks like you're still hard at work. So, and thank you for all that you and Ducks Unlimited do for sportsmen and for conservation in our home state of Colorado, but beyond as well and across the country. You said something in your testimony I wanted to ask you about very quickly. You said, hunters and anglers have paid for conservation, ensuring that our country was taken from the brink of wildlife decimation in the early 1900s to a renaissance of wildlife abundance today. Can you tell us what would be the impact if Congress fails to reauthorize this authority? What would it mean for wetlands?
Thank you for the question. The reality today is that we're still losing wetlands at a pretty significant pace. A significant part of that is out on the Gulf, where we're having a lot of issues with erosion, but also all across the country, every state is losing wetlands. The efforts of NACA and other programs that Ducks Unlimited participates with, along with the other folks in the conservation community that are interested in wetlands, we're not overcoming that problem. We're just slowing it right now. The less resources we have, the less effort we'll be able to expend to stem that tide. And these monies that we're talking about in this bill are important. Again, as I mentioned earlier, we have the ability in this program to magnify the value of those funds. And in doing so, we can have a significant impact, more than just what appears to be the value associated with this particular trust fund interest itself. It gets multiplied. So from that standpoint, it is a very substantial part of the effort that's going to go on across this country towards wetlands. But it's without it, we're just losing faster.
Would it be fair to say that this legislation is critical for wetlands across the country?
We certainly feel it is.
As you know, the Pittman-Robertson Act is funded by excise taxes on firearms and ammunition. In our home state of Colorado, we've seen an increasing number of restrictions on the Second Amendment rights of our citizens, and these policies and laws are making it harder for law-abiding citizens to purchase firearms and ammunition, including hunting gear. Given that this excise tax revenue funds programs like NACA, do you believe Second Amendment restrictions could threaten the long-term sustainability of conservation efforts that rely on this model?
I think significant restriction would definitely damage it from the standpoint. I mean, it's sportsmen and women have been willing funders of conservation for 100 years, and anything that makes those ranks smaller takes away the potential for that funding.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Thank you to our other witnesses. Madam Chair, I yield the remainder of my time back to you.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Wahlberg for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. As one of the many hunters and anglers on this committee, I'm pleased that we are considering legislation today that would help preserve the wildlife habitat we all enjoy and we're all stewards of. Having the privilege of representing Michigan's 5th District, which includes both Lake Erie and Lake Michigan as bookends, I know the importance of the Pittman-Robertson funding and the important role NAWCA plays in wildlife habitat restoration, especially in wetlands. Sitting a duck blind, in fact, one that probably former Chairman and Representative Dingell sat in, with friends and with family, watching the sunrise over Lake Erie, for example, in spite of the presence of cormorants to the extreme. Something that we want to pass along to the generations to come is what we enjoy. In Michigan alone, NAWCA has contributed over $23 million in funding, matched with nearly $67 million in partner contributions to conserve over 63,000 acres of habitat. Mr. Anderson, in your written testimony, you outlined the significant impact that both Pittman-Robertson and NAWCA have had on projects in Colorado, and the importance of ensuring these funds are preserved but managed with common sense approach. Why is it important that we allow the unallocated Pittman-Robertson funds to be used for NAWCA, and what would it mean for hunters like those in my home state of Michigan?
Thank you for that question. Michigan is a very active spot for Ducks Unlimited and NAWCA because of the opportunities that exist there with the Great Lakes being a very critical, important, historic migration corridor. That's probably the birds that you've enjoyed in that duck blind. As I mentioned earlier, that the every resource we can get improves our ability to perform the job right now, and with the amount of pressure on the resource for other land uses, other water uses, also the pressure that's occurring because of climate variability. It's a critical point right now to have as much funding as is practical available to try to address those kind of challenges. But we're very active in that Great Lakes area right now with Ducks Unlimited is with a significant amount of NAWCA funding and other resources as well, trying to answer it on behalf of your constituents.
Yeah, and it's having some significant impact as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you. I would like to quickly turn to the Great Lakes Fishery Research Reauthorization Act. This bipartisan legislation would reauthorize the Great Lakes Fishery Research Program within the USGS. The program helps support the important work done by the Great Lakes Fisheries Commission and provides critical research that helps ensure states can implement sound fisheries management practices. For example, the binational work has helped reduce the destructive sea lamprey population in the Great Lakes. So I thank the chair for considering this legislation and her continued support for the Great Lakes. I'm willing to yield time back to the chair.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the witnesses for your valuable time and testimony here today, and also for the members for their participation and the questions. The members of the committee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we will ask you to respond to those in writing if they are received. Under Committee Rule 3, members of the committee must submit such questions to the subcommittee clerk by 5 p.m. Eastern on Friday, April 11th, and the hearing record will be held open for 10 business days for these responses. Without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned. Thank you. Thank you.